In 1934, an ad was published in the Hollywood Reporter titled "Wake Up Hollywood Producers." It was written by Henry Brandt, the president of the Independent Theatre Owners Association. In it, he criticised movie studios for producing big-budget films with highly paid actors who he claimed had zero box office draw. Among the list of stars considered box office poison were Marlene Dietrich, Greta Garbo, and most memorably Katharine Hepburn. She had starred in a series of films that, while critically successful, were total flops at the box office. Known for playing complex, independent women, her characters didn't have a lot of broad appeal. Hepburn herself had a reputation for being unfriendly with the press and didn't fit the mould of a popular actress. After being offered the lead in B-movie Mother Carey's Chickens, she decided she had to buy herself out of her contract with RKO to avoid having to be in the film. In 1940, she would engineer her own comeback with a role that was tailor-made for her. Having finalised their divorce, Tracy, played by Katharine Hepburn, and Dexter, played by Cary Grant, are parting ways, and clearly there are no hard feelings. Seriously though, we'll see Tracy on the receiving end of Dexter's anger over and over and over again. Now what if I told you that these two are actually the romantic leads of the film, and after multiple love triangles, proposals and many glasses of champagne, they'll end up reunited with a grand romantic gesture. This is the 1940s screwball comedy The Philadelphia Story, and it happens to be one of my favourite films. Over the years though, I've realised it somehow manages to have some of the most misogynistic dialogue you'll hear in a romantic comedy, while also having a strong, complex leading female role that saved Katharine Hepburn's career. Let's start by quickly going over the plot. The film follows Tracy Lord, a wealthy socialite who's set to marry social climber George Kittredge. The wedding plans are interrupted when her ex-husband CK Dexter Haven arrives.
Hello, friends and enemies.
With a last-minute wedding present. Two tabloid reporters, Macaulay Connor and Liz Imbrie. What follows are love triangles, a plot to take down a corrupt magazine publisher, and a surprise wedding, complete with mistaken identity shenanigans thrown in there. The film was adapted from a play of the same name by Philip Barry and directed by George Cukor. Barry had written the character of Tracy Lord with Hepburn in mind, and the play was very successful with her in the lead. She acquired the film rights with a bit of help from Howard Hughes, who she was seeing at the time. The director George Cukor was someone she had built up a good working relationship with, and who was known for depicting strong female characters on screen. Cary Grant seemed like an easy choice to play Hepburn's cheeky, charming love interest. They had already starred alongside each other in 3 films, their chemistry clear to see. With a surprising amount of control over the project, she would make the film that would save her eventually legendary career. The screwball comedy genre emerged in the 1930s. These films are characterised by fast-paced, witty banter, strong female leads, slapstick comedy and wacky situations. With female leads in positions of power over their male counterparts, it's often said to involve a battle of the sexes type story. These traits are very evident throughout the film. Relationships across social classes were also very common within the screwball genre, as writer Andrew Bergman summed up. The overwhelming attractiveness of the screwball comedies involved more than the wonderful personnel. It had to do with the effort they made at reconciling the irreconcilable. They created in America a perfect unity, all classes as one, the rural-urban divide breached, love and decency and neighbourliness ascendant. A subgenre of the screwball which the Philadelphia Story fits into is the comedy of remarriage. These films usually feature characters who divorce, explore other relationships, but always end up back together. This is reflective of changing attitudes to marriage at the time, with divorce rates in the US rising from 80,000 in 1910 to 160,000 in 1920. Society was beginning to place less importance on the marriage, as it became more about the value of love and finding the right companion. However, censorship at the time meant that Hollywood still could not outright reject marriage, so the divorce is always reversed by the end of the film. This censorship came from Hollywood's production code. If you clicked on this video, you're probably already nerdy enough to be familiar with this. But just in case, I'll give a brief explanation. The production code, also known as the Hays Code, was a set of censorship guidelines for films released in the US. Introduced in 1930 by William H. Hays, the president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, it took a few years for the code to really be used. The aim of the code wasn't only to restrict what could literally be shown on screen, but to promote traditional values in America. This meant that things like sex outside of marriage could not be shown in a positive light, authority had to be respected, and any crime had to be punished. The audience could not be encouraged to feel sympathy for a criminal. The clergy could not be the bad guys or even comedic characters. Sometimes politicians, police or judges could be the villains, but this was only if it was made very clear they differed greatly to the upstanding image their jobs and titles represented. To sum up, the code aimed to promote a simplified version of life. Evil is wrong and good is right. Authority must be trusted and obeyed, and anyone who does not abide by this is the villain. So none of that sounds very fun. But the screwball comedy probably exists because of these limitations. Filmmakers were forced to find ways around the rules so that they could show romantic relationships, sex outside of marriage, and divorce. Director Edward Dmytryk said the code had a very good effect because it made us think. If we wanted to get something across that was censorable, we had to do it deviously, we had to be clever, and it usually turned out to be much better than if we had done it straight. I briefly mentioned it before, but it's important to acknowledge that a big aspect of these films was the aim of showing the upper class in a more positive and understanding light, at a time when many people in America were living in poverty. This is something that can be seen in the Philadelphia story, but for this video I'm going to focus on its treatment of women and gender roles, through the character of Tracy Lord. We first meet Tracy in her home with her mother and younger sister Dinah. Her father's noticeably absent, and we find out that he's in New York with another woman. The family know this, and Tracy tries to reassure her mother that the best thing to do is leave him. Dexter soon arrives with Mike and Liz. Unbeknownst to Tracy, they've arranged a deal with Spy magazine to cover Tracy's wedding. In return, Tracy's father and his scandalous affair will remain private. Mike is the journalist hired to write about Tracy's wedding. He's introduced in Spy magazine's offices as a man who values his principles, to his own detriment sometimes. He and Liz, a photographer for Spy, both come from working class backgrounds. This makes them more relatable to the audience as they experience this strange world of wealth alongside us. Liz is shown to be tough, smart and caring as she looks out for Mike. He seems to take this for granted, as if Liz is just performing the duties of a wife or partner that the film seems to promote. It's not until the end of the film that it seems like he really sees her, which fits with his moody intellectual with a heart of gold personality. Mike is strongly against the idea of covering Tracy's wedding, seeing it as beneath him. He has a clear dislike for the upper class, instantly making assumptions about the type of person Tracy is before he's even met her. Their first meeting is awkward as Tracy plays up the rich girl character, and Mike is bewildered and slightly disgusted. That is, until he finds her in the library reading his book of short stories, the one published work he's proud of. He seems surprised that she appreciates it, and the fact that she can wrap her small female brain around his writing makes him see her as closer to his equal.
Well, are you sure you're doing the right thing? You know what happens to girls like you when they read books like mine. They begin to think. That's bad.
I read this as Mike trying to hide his own insecurities about his work by making fun of Tracy instead. His book wasn't a success, and he still needs to write for Spy to put food on the table. The two of them start to make an emotional connection during this scene.
I believe you put the toughness on to save your skin.
What do you think so?
I know a little about that.
Do you?
Quite a lot.
This emotional intelligence surprises him. She's starting to seem more like a real person, and as Mike begins to see this side of her, it makes the audience think about it too. Is there more to her than the glamour and money of her family? This harmony doesn't last too long though. Tracy offers him her family's house at the lake as a place to stay while he focuses on his true passion, writing short fiction. This shatters any illusion that her and Mike are on the same level, and he takes offence to the invitation. Whether this hurts his masculinity or he genuinely just resents the idea that he might need someone like her to help, he lashes out and their new friendship is stopped in its tracks. To understand Tracy, we need to look at her parents and the influence they've had on her. Tracy is the only person who really has a problem with her father's actions. His affair is seen as gossip for Spy magazine, and the family seem worried about the potential scandal, but no one else is really angry at him the way that she is. In Tracy's mother, we see what's expected of a good wife from the men in the film. Her and Tracy argue about the father. Her mother's attitude is that she should be here, ready to be his wife when he gets back, even though she knows well what he's up to. Her and Dinah even seem sympathetic to the father and Dexter, despite everything they've both done. But we'll get to Dexter in a bit. Tracy's mother is worried that if she leaves him, she'll be all alone. And later in the film, she admits that she thinks his affairs are really none of her business anyway. Meanwhile, Tracy is slated for being a bad wife and a bad woman, for not showing more understanding to the people in her life, while her father faces no real consequences for the actual betrayal of his marriage. And if you think that's bad, it only gets worse. When Tracy's mother says the affair is her father's business only, her father agrees. To us and to Tracy, this sounds ridiculous, but he is being serious. He goes on to explain that a man having an affair is to do with him longing for his youth, and he blames this longing on not having a young woman, such as his daughter, to show him affection anymore. Think about this for a second. He's cheating on his wife because he misses that affection he used to get from Tracy. This way of looking at it seems shocking now, but no one really questions his way of thinking. Even Tracy feels defeated by the end of the scene, starting to believe that maybe she is the problem. The fact that she ends up back with the man who treated her so badly is less shocking when we see the type of relationship she's been exposed to throughout her life. Tracy and her father are friends again by the end of the film, with a quick conversation that wraps up their issues with each other. This is an unfortunate result of the film not having much time to explore this relationship properly, as well as needing a more clean, happy ending. In its defence though, I think that the father is portrayed as the antagonist of the story. It's the only thing that saves this aspect from being completely misogynistic, as I don't think we're supposed to side with him. His treatment of Tracy just teaches us more about her as a person, evoking more sympathy from the audience. Things come to a head the night before Tracy's wedding, when she turns to alcohol to cope with her feelings of anger and confusion from the clash with her father, leading to her and Mike getting drunk and going back to the Lord's house after the party. The interaction between the two is flirtatious, but still has their earlier banter and teasing. Mike's writing and principles are such a big part of his identity, and the reason he believes he's above these wealthy people. Despite him being more down to earth and aware of the real world, he falls into the same behaviour as the other men in the film. Just before him and Tracy go home together, he drunkenly confronts Dexter about his treatment of Tracy.
She's sort of like a queen. A radiant, glorious queen. And you can't treat her like other women.
This is another way of objectifying her and worshipping her in a way she doesn't want. He also accepts Dexter's apology, which is apparently enough for Mike, even though Tracy herself never gets an apology. He falls into the trap of needing to conquer the challenge of Tracy in order to boost his ego. He only becomes interested in her after she compliments his book, and he sees her as unlike any woman he's ever met. But that's because there is no woman like the one he's seeing, not even Tracy herself. It would be an accomplishment to be with her, but this is not the relationship Tracy wants, and it plays into the idea that she's something to be conquered, rather than someone to be loved. Dexter and Tracy are complicated, to say the least. Like I said before, a part of the Hays Code's influence was the comedy of remarriage. If a couple divorced or separated during the film, they would need to get back together by the end. This means that we need to like Dexter and root for him and Tracy. If we follow Dexter's story, we can see how he's portrayed as the hero, even if Tracy can't see it. We've already looked at the opening and seen how his abuse of her is played for jokes multiple times. When he's introduced in Spy's office, everyone assumes he's helping to cover the wedding just to get revenge on Tracy. And he goes along with this assumption. However, when he arrives at the Lord's house, it's revealed that he's actually helping to cover the wedding so that Spy will drop the story they have on Tracy's father. So really he is helping Tracy by striking this deal. His physical abuse of Tracy is referenced several times, but instead of framing this as him being a bad person, it's suggested that she drove him to it by not being a loving and supportive wife. By having the people closest to her sympathise with Dexter, it makes us question whether he really is that bad. Even though he reminds her again and again how she was a disappointment as a wife, Dexter makes it his mission to ruin her engagement to George, often by implying that he's better for her.
She needs trouble to mature her, Kittredge. Give her lots of it.
I'm afraid she can't count on me for that.
No, that's too bad. Sometimes for your own sake, Red, I think you should have stuck to me longer.
I thought it was for life, but the nice judge gave me a full pardon.
He proves this by letting her explore things with George and Mike before ending up back with Dexter. On top of all of this, he's the one who orchestrates the plan to silence Spy and get the magazine to leave the family alone. And when he and George come across Mike and Tracy together, he does try to avoid any drama and encourages George not to jump to any conclusions.
You don't believe it, then?
Believe what?
Well, the implications of what you saw, let us say.
Well, what else am I to believe?
That's entirely up to you.
He punches Mike before George gets the chance to, and stands up for Tracy. So we see him defending them from George, and he's even willing to help Mike, the man who might take Tracy away from him.
But I thought I'd better hit you before he did. He's in better shape than I am.
Well, you'll do.
In the chaos of the following morning, he does his best to reassure Tracy and make her feel better about herself. By showing him help Mike, who is the audience character, and even having Tracy fall back in love with him, they force us to consider that maybe he really has been a good guy all along.
But never in my life. Not if I live to be 100 will I ever forget how you tried to stand me on my feet again today.
Another factor in making him so likeable is the casting of Cary Grant. He appeared in romantic films with Katharine Hepburn before, so it's easy to see the chemistry the two of them have together. His reliability as a proven star and romantic lead made him the ideal actor to take on the job of making Dexter a likeable and trustworthy character. It might have also been seen as a good move to balance out Hepburn's box office poison with the co-star like this. Before we move on, let's go back to the opening scene from earlier. On the surface, this is just a quirky slapstick version of their divorce, setting up the two main characters and where they left off. But when we look at it in the context of everything else that happens in the film, it's not so funny. There are multiple references to Dexter hitting Tracy during their marriage. Dinah even jokes about hoping he does it again so she gets to see it. When Dexter is with Tracy and Mike at the pool, he says,
I thought all writers drank to excess and beat their wives. You know, one time I think I secretly wanted to be a writer.
This is played like a half joke. It would be maybe too far to say it straight out, so this way he can disguise it as a playful dig instead. He says to George that Tracy needs trouble to mature her. Obviously this is speculation, but could he be referring to the volatile nature of their past relationship, suggesting that the abuse was necessary for Tracy to become a mature woman and a satisfactory wife? With these scenes in mind, looking back at the opening scene feels a bit different. Her throwing him out is due to the nasty treatment Tracy has received. Snapping the golf club is an attempt to fight back by humiliating and emasculating him. And the aggressive shove through the door is recontextualised as an act both are far too familiar with. Tracy is compared to a goddess or something similar several times throughout the film, because she refuses to accept the bad behaviour of the men in her life. This is first mentioned when her and Dexter are reunited, and he says,
No, you're slipping, Red. I used to be afraid of that look. The withering glance of the goddess.
This phrase is used to reduce her to something unfeminine and without sexuality. This criticism of her is probably most memorably used in the scene where Dexter interrupts Tracy and Mike at the pool. Dexter launches a full-on attack during this scene, and notably Mike does nothing to interfere or defend her. It seems like he doesn't feel it's his place to do anything, and only when sex is brought into the discussion does he excuse himself from the situation.
She's a girl who's generous to a fault.
To a fault, Mr. Connor.
Except to other people's faults.
Dexter begins by blaming Tracy for not supporting him through his alcoholism, reinforcing the idea that the wife is there to serve and care for the husband, no matter what, and that men will always find a woman to blame for their poor decisions or actions.
She finds human imperfection unforgivable. When I gradually discovered that my relationship to her was supposed to be not that of a loving husband and a good companion, but... Oh, never mind.
Say it.
But that of a kind of high priest to a virgin goddess. Then my drinks grew deeper and more frequent, that's all.
This echoes the line he used in their first scene. It's degrading to Tracy by bringing up such an intimate and personal point, only to embarrass her in front of Mike. It also suggests that he sees her as a failure of a wife because she wasn't as open to him sexually as he wanted, as though this is somehow the reason he turned to alcohol. He suggests that her character, the goddess, is a challenge to men, which is what makes her attractive. He's promoting a society where men view women as objects to either make them look good or to boost their ego. The line that I think best sums up this whole attitude is when Dexter tells her, with real contempt,
Because you'll never be a first-class human being or a first-class woman until you've learned to have some regard for human frailty.
I think that his emphasis on the word woman reveals a lot about what he really means. He's not concerned with her being a good person, so much as he thinks she didn't do a good job as a wife. She didn't stick by him through thick and thin, domestic abuse and alcoholism, and didn't perform her wifely duties, sex whenever he wanted. This unfair standard Tracy's being held to is the point that triggers her to get really upset. Recently I got to see this film in the cinema, and I cannot exaggerate how quickly this scene killed off the laughter in the room. For a romantic comedy, this scene is played so seriously that you can't help but be shocked that these two are supposed to be right for each other. Maybe this is what gets to her the most, because it reminds her of things she's been told her whole life. We've already looked at her relationship with her parents, and specifically her father. Her father and Dexter give similar excuses about her being cold and unsympathetic to their troubles. Throughout her life, she's seen women, herself included, blamed for the bad behaviour of the men in their lives. The Philadelphia Story is a sharp, clever entry in the screwball comedy genre, with a star-studded cast who have great chemistry throughout. It also raises issues with its portrayal of class and gender. Tracy is treated badly throughout the film by her family, partners and friends, and by the end of the film seems doomed to stay in these relationships. But I do think that by placing the father in an antagonistic role, the filmmakers are letting us see this behaviour and attitude as the problem it is. I'd like to use a quote from Caroline Seed's article for the AV Club that I think describes this well. Though on the surface the Philadelphia Story is a story about class, its most poignant ideas centre on the baggage we place onto women, the pedestals we put them on, and the pedestals they sometimes unintentionally climb onto themselves. The Philadelphia Story sees the notion of the flawless, strong woman who has it all for the impossible standard that it is, and instead champions space for human vulnerability, for women to behave, well, naturally.
To
Behave herself naturally.
The film was a massive success with audiences and critics. It was nominated for 6 Oscars and won 2, James Stewart for Best Actor and Donald Ogden Stewart for Best Screenplay. Katharine Hepburn was nominated for what would end up being one of her most iconic roles. Even without winning the award, it was clear that she had taken back control of her career and changed people's minds. She challenged those who had put her on her own pedestal and then dragged her down at the first opportunity. Time magazine opened their review with the words, "Come on back, Katie, all is forgiven," apparently quoted by the person who had originally put her in the box office poison list. It has held on to its status in the collection of Hollywood's best romantic comedies, despite tackling serious themes through its characters' flaws. The snapshot that ends the film is an unusually realistic way for this story to end. Like Hepburn's career didn't end with box office poison, the Philadelphia story is not wrapped up in a nice clean bow, but is left open for their lives to continue after the credits roll.